This is our panel of presenters. Each of them has a world-changing journalistic story to share with you. And after we've gone down the line and given our information, we will open up the floor to some questions from the journalistic institutions that we have here today. So I believe we can start at the end of the line there with Mason.
Okay. So the topic that I'm presenting on is the NSA leaks, which Edward Snowden leaked, but I won't be going into details about Edward Snowden himself, because that's next. So in the beginning of June 2013, Edward Snowden, who was previously he worked for the NSA in America, he found out information about some potentially corrupt practices of the NSA, and he shared them with the public, although it was going against what he was allowed to do. It was a breach in security and a breach in the law, but he felt that it was important to share this information for the public to know and be aware that their private records, internet use and phone records were being collected by the NSA for, as they said, security purposes. He leaked this information to 3 journalists, and those journalists were Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, and Ewan McAskill, and they worked for The Guardian. And then they released that information in June. It had been given to them in Hong Kong in May. And once they released that information, it went public and started a lot of debates about what was going on, and put these journalists, as well as Edward Snowden, in a sticky situation where their lives were at risk for sharing this information.
Maybe you could tell us more about the implications of this information on the NSA itself and a little less about Mr. Snowden.
Okay. So the NSA's primary goal is to prevent terrorist attacks in the U.S. And they do this by collecting information about suspicious activity throughout the U.S. that could be happening. Some of the morally ambiguous stuff that they do is looking at other countries' information as well. But their main priority is protecting America and the homeland and keeping terrorists out of the country. And although their practices are iffy, they go as far as they can to protect the U.S.
Oh, thank you very much. Francois, would you like to say a bit about Mr. Snowden himself?
Alright, so Edward Snowden was a former CIA and NSA analyst who leaked the information, and we just found out. And the way he did this was, he was an analyst, he was also a tech genius. He managed to find a way through old computers in the NSA to access sensible information, which he then downloaded onto flash drives and managed to get out of the NSA headquarters, apparently through a Rubik's Cube. Then this is where he started to flee the country, as well. Obviously he had some information that the NSA did not want to be spread out to the public, which was that they were spying on their own citizens. He fled to Hong Kong, where he, as much as he wanted to take a low profile, he still used his own credit cards, his full name and everything, knowing perfectly that he would be found really quickly, so he had to act really quickly. So he contacted a journalist that he trusted based on some research that he'd done, the most notable journalist being Glenn Greenwald, who worked for The Guardian, and he flew Glenn Greenwald and Laura Portras to Hong Kong so that they could have a face-to-face interview and he could show everything that he had gathered on those flash drives. In Hong Kong, I mean, at first there were speculations from the journalists because obviously trying to sell information, some analysts trying to sell information to the press has been done before and it's often not viable information. But now after that they were convinced, they conducted a series of interviews with Snowden, where Snowden released step-by-step information to the public. And he finished with a big interview live on TV, explaining everything and his actions.
So where is Snowden now, and what have the effects been of his actions?
Well, now Edward Snowden has gone to Russia, where he has been staying for several years since the drama now. He is still in Russia. His stay has been extended till the next year, and the next year he will be viable for an application for his citizenship in Russia, which he most likely will do as will be beneficial since he is still wanted in America. Well, the effect has been that, the direct effect at the time was that everyone was questioning the NSA and everyone was questioning the government and how and what they were actually doing with the capabilities of spying on people. It threw a big shock that the people's privacy was so touched on, and the government knew a lot about them. And this, in the long run, has sparked a lot of debate on how the NSA should be working, how the government, what power the government should have on, and what terms of human rights and civil rights is that attend and all of that.
Thank you very much. Maximilian, please.
Yep. So hello everyone. I'm going to introduce our work on the Panama Papers. So the Panama Papers scandal refers to the biggest data leak in the history of journalism. Nearly 380 members of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which is the YCIG, investigated for months on 11.5 million files from Mossack Fonseca. Well, Mossack Fonseca is a Panamanian law firm specializing on the domiciliation of company in tax havens, which means they actually create offshore companies. This is important because these offshore companies were used by thousands of citizens from around the world to avoid from paying taxes. We count more than 200,000 of these offshore companies, all run by the Mossack Fonseca, which is the big one. So Mossack Fonseca was actually formed by a former SS officer named Jürgen Mossack in 1977. It concerns a lot of people, as I said before, a lot of sportsmen, politicians, and world-renowned figures have their information linked to Mossack Fonseca. Was any of this illegal? Of course this was, as all of those people used these offshore companies to avoid paying taxes. What else? Yeah, we could talk a bit on the victims. Well, there have been a lot of victims around the world, but we don't talk about them much, as it's more like a broad subject. The victims could be, for example, Syria, where there have been recognized 3 or 4 offshore companies which have been providing fuel for Syria's army, and then this fuel will be later used to bomb the citizens. We can also talk about Uganda, where the Heritage Oil and Gas Company attempted to avoid taxes by paying Mossack Fonseca. The problem is that they had to pay 400 billion in tax, which represents more than the healthcare budget of Uganda in a year, which created a lot of victims, mostly in the women's and child's in the birth rates.
Thank you. And Catherine.
Okay, so the case that I will be representing is the Watergate scandal. So the scandal was a major political scandal that occurred in the United States during the 1970s when 5 men were arrested following a break-in into the Democratic National Committee's headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C., in which President Richard Nixon was involved. Essentially, the reasons for the break-in were mainly for information gathering of the Democratic National Committee, in which President Richard Nixon was highly suspicious of. He was worried he wouldn't get re-elected. This involved Nixon forming a group, including former CIA agent Howard Hunt and former FBI agent G. Gordon Liddy. However, it was actually during the second of these break-ins that the 5 men were caught and arrested inside the offices of the DNC. On June 20th, the Washington Post investigative journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein reported on the CIA connection that was a part of the group. These 2 investigative journalists were really instrumental thus in revealing the scandal. By September 1972, the 5 men, as well as the 2 men linked to the FBI and the CIA, were indicted by a grand jury. And despite the connections to the scandal, Nixon was decisively re-elected that November, regardless. So, however, in July of the following year, Nixon's assistant Alexander Butterfield revealed the existence of Nixon-installed tape recording devices throughout the White House. Nixon refused to release the tapes on the grounds of executive privilege. And to save himself, Nixon dismissed the Attorney General and Deputy in what he called the Saturday Night Massacre. Undoubtedly, public outcry followed, and Nixon responded with one of his most quoted speeches where he says, "People have got to know if their president is a crook, and I'm not a crook." The Watergate tapes were finally released, however, in 1974, and there was an 18-minute section that was proved to have been deleted. However, of the exposed facts, it was proved that Richard Nixon was heavily involved, essentially, and that resulted in his resignation on the August 8th, 1974.
Thank you. And finally?
I'm gonna present what is an investigative journalist and a little bit of history and the traits that him or he has to have. They deeply investigate a single topic of interest, such as crimes, political corruption, or corporate wrongdoing, traditionally being conducted by newspaper, wire services, and freelance journalists. They report through their own initiative, and work product matters to the readers and viewers or listeners. This has been going on since the late 19th century. American journalists have used their craft to call government and corporations to account for wrongdoing, secret practices, and even corruption, often sparking public outcry and reform. The personality traits that the investigative journalist must have are perseverance, courage, curiosity, and drive to uncover the truth with critical analysis.
Thank you. Okay, so we will in just a minute open up to questions from the journalists. First though, we would like to request that, first of all, when staging a question, please state the representation that you come from for your journalistic institution. And second, we ask please that the questions be relevant to the topics presented by each of our good people here. All right, any questions? Yes?
Hello, I'm Luisa, I'm coming from BBC, and I had a question regarding the NSA leaks. So it can be said, as mentioned, that investigative journalists have certain traits and that they are motivated by ethics and morals and have a clear sense of what is right and wrong. But some have argued that leaking the NSA documents was wrong, seeing as it was illegal. Do you agree with this point of view?
The, to say that it was morally wrong to share this information with the public it's tricky because it's information about people. Well, what the leaks did was basically inform the public that they didn't have privacy, essentially, and that there's reason to be concerned that the information that they think is private and to themselves can be shared through the government, and the government might not be trustworthy. There were different implications about this information. It definitely made a lot of people really worried and distrustful of the NSA and of the government as a whole, which is understandable. But leaking this information, it could be seen as wrong because not only did it make people distrusting of the government, but it kind of shows to other governments and other agencies throughout the world what exactly the NSA is doing. It didn't go into really explicit detail, but it did share information that was supposed to not be shared, of course. And so there was the potential that it would create a threat to not only the NSA, but to the USA as a whole, because this information can be used sort of to attack the NSA. So it's easy to see why one would think that it's wrong, because there's a reason that it wasn't shared in the first place. But at the same time, the public has a certain right to know what their government is doing and where their privacy really stands.
I think it would also be fair to let Francois from the group about Edward Snowden to give his opinion on the moralistic motivations for the leak, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, Mason covered a big part of it, but morally, if we're just morally speaking, of course the population are allowed to know what is going on, what their government is doing, and what type of information they have access to. Now, if you come from the legal aspect, obviously that's a whole different ballgame. I mean, legally, there was ways that this was perfectly fine, but morally it wasn't. And you got part of America that thought that releasing this information, the fact that Edward Snowden released this information was an act of betrayal, and he should be considered as a traitor, which is why he's also being wanted by America right now. But ethically speaking, everyone should have a right, and this is why he done it, because he felt that everyone should have the right to know exactly what is going on behind their backs and what type of information is let out there to the government and potentially the public.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is Dumase from CNN. Did he have any alternative way he could have done things apart from what he did?
For Edward Snowden?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very sensitive case. We're talking about someone who managed to leak information from the NSA. The NSA being one of those secret intelligence agencies there is. I mean, they hold the information, a lot of sensitive information. So there's not really another way he could have really done it, because of course he could have just come out and spoke about what he's seen and what is going on behind their backs. But if he didn't have any concrete proof, no one would have bought his story, no one would have published on the news, no one would have believed it. Now, I mean, you can always argue that there's always another way to do things, but concretely, without information, without evidence, people will not believe you. I mean, if someone just stands here and says, "Oh, they're spying on your back," they can't take you for granted without seeing that concrete proof that the only way he could have done it is by stealing that information and leaking it to the public.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm representing Le Soir, and I have a question about Joe Snowden. Was it a political choice for Edward Snowden to choose The Guardian to publish the leaks?
He chose The Guardian, but most specifically he chose the reporters more than the newspaper, because he done in-depth research of their works and their morals and how they do things, and they shared the same ideology as Snowden, so he felt that he could go through them, and going to them would get the information to the right places rather than them just turning Snowden in because he was also wanted at the time. So.
Thank you. Yes.
Same question. Not the same question, but to result. I'm Bada from New York Times, and can you clarify more on the legality of the charges Snowden was facing? What was he fully charged with? Because normally there are employment contracts where there's a term of confidentiality. Was there a similar contract in this case, if you're aware?
Well, legally, the charges that are put against him are theft of government property and 2 counts of violating the Espionage Act on a federal and governmental level. But apart from that, there's also other classified information that is not really released to the public, but he is right now wanted as a traitor for theft of government property.
Thank you. Yes.
So I had another question regarding Watergate. So Richard Nixon, as you mentioned, was forced to resign due to this scandal. But how some people have stated that he did manage to do a lot of good while he was in office, such as implementing the Environmental Protection Agency, and he fought for gender equality, signed legislation which banned sexual discrimination, and so on. So with this being said, do you think President Nixon resigning due to the Watergate scandal was really what was best for the American people and the United States as a whole?
Well, from what has been discovered, he was either going to be impeached regardless. So I think, yeah, it was his best option to just resign. Yeah, it's interesting because Gerald Ford, who replaced him after, did pardon him and did mention those things as well. It was just unfortunate that the scandal had led to that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Meghna from Independent, and I have a question regarding the Panama Papers. Is Panama Papers the only outlier, or are there other jurisdictions posing similar problems where such offshore companies could be used besides Panama?
Well, thanks for your question. Well, I think not, because Panama Papers is indeed an enormous scandal. As I said before, it took more than a year to analyze all the leaks, as there were 11.5 million. So I think the Panama Papers regroup a lot of these offshores into one, and I'm not sure there's another big group such as Mossack Fonseca doing that sort of work. But if there is, I'm happy to know about it.
Thank you.
Sorry, maybe I also have a question regarding the Panama Papers. Did you get the feeling that there was a sense of outrage after the knowledge of the Panama Papers, or that it was somewhat muted and not many people sort of felt betrayed by the whole economic setup?
I'm not sure, in my opinion, I'm not sure there was such an outrage as for us not involved in such a scandal. Seems like way too far ahead, like we're talking about millions and millions of dollars. So I think we're talking about problems which doesn't really refer to us as individuals, more about people not paying that tax. So it goes to the government, and then of course, yeah, with people not paying their tax, it goes also to, well, it impacts us as well, in the means that we're not getting what, we're paying more tax for the people who don't pay taxes. But what I mean is that I'm not sure we're really like, there's much outrage within the scandal, because yeah, it doesn't regard really like an elite of people, which in my opinion doesn't refer much to us. But yeah, we talked about it a lot, but I'm not sure it caused like that much of an outrage that it should have done. So yeah.
In your paper, your group had actually mentioned that the scandal had reached as far as Iceland, where the head of state was forced to resign. Would you be able to tell us a bit more about that, perhaps?
Well, if you give me 2 seconds, I will.
Of course.
Iceland, you said.
Yes. Perhaps we could move on from that for now.
Yeah, perhaps I'll go into that later. I'll tell you when I'm.
Very well. Any other questions?
All right, maybe just wrap it up as we're waiting for maybe the answer to the question. Do you individually feel that at this point in time, if you were to take a snapshot of 2018, I mean, is there a sense that investigative journalism has in fact, grown and become something that people look up to, a very respectful trait and what have you? Or do you feel that people are more jaded about scandals in general, and therefore it's just one more scandal that happens to be uncovered by journalists doing their job, and therefore, there seems to be a little outrage or reaction, as we said, regarding the Panama Papers? And maybe connected to that, do you get the feeling that in today's very hectic type of media landscape, that journalists do have enough time and the luxury of spending days, weeks, probably months, to actually investigate one particular issue and go as in-depth as they possibly can, or is it just wishful thinking at this point?
Is this a question open to anybody?
Yeah, anybody. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in my personal opinion, I would have to say that investigative journalism has become a very mixed opinion issue when it comes to the media. Especially because, firstly, it wouldn't be unfair to say that it started sort of as an American phenomenon. It's very much an objective of our media to at least try and seem politically non-biased. And so at the very start, scandals like Watergate were some of the first that you saw really investigated on and reported. But it is important to note that we live in a media-heavy time. As time goes on, there are more and more different sources from which to gain facts and opinions, which are more blended now than ever. And so I think that your healthy media consumer tries to take things with a grain of salt. Of course, these sort of cases we're talking about all here on this panel are quite unique. It isn't every week that you discover an NSA leak or the Panama Papers or something quite of this magnitude. But certainly the good thing about it is that so long as we have an active media, they can hopefully help inform us of things we ought to know that we wouldn't have been informed of on our own, even if that would have been from the people we've trusted and elected to lead our societies.
If you want to kind of go down the line, I can start and then we can kind of go through the rest after that. I think it'd be really interesting to take a look at how the rate at which information spreads from, say, the Watergate scandal up until something like the NSA leaks, because of course, the internet and our access to social media and to media as a whole. It's skyrocketed. So it'd be interesting to look at how different opinions were spread during the time where Nixon was president. as opposed to century, because with Nixon, it was, you know, you hear about something on the news, in the news, on TV, you have access to that, you read about it in the newspaper, you hear about it on the radio, and that's essentially it besides like face-to-face, like talking to people. But in 2013, you come across 15 different articles about it when you're scrolling through Facebook, or you get text messages talking about it, and you see it on every news station. So it's interesting to think about like how that changes and what kind of implications that has. Because investigative reporting, I mean, it's always been important because there's always issues and crises that are important and need to be investigated. But now it seems like there are so many different crises that that everyone needs to investigate everything all the time, even if you're someone like us, like just an individual as part of a society. You kind of have to take on this role as an investigative journalist of your own and figure out what is truth and what is not the truth. And you have to kind of figure out for yourself and go through and interpret all of this information that you receive through all the various different media sources to figure out what's really going on. And I think it kind of leads to a certain information overload where it's like, okay, it's not just like everybody's talking about Nixon, but that's really it. There's like a couple other things that are going on, but everyone's talking about this one thing. It's like everyone's talking about X, Y, Z, and a million other things. And it's hard to know what to focus on, you know, with this vast information that people have at their fingertips. They have access to it all the time. I think people focus less on one specific topic and more like kind of have everything in their periphery.
Thank you. Francois?
Yeah. Today I feel that investigative journalism is more complicated than ever as a job. I mean, it has become a lot more complicated than 30 years ago because of legal aspects, security, moral, and a lot of different reasons. But it's also the time where it's the most needed. Just simply by the fact that it is widely known that the news sources that we see on TV, and the journals and all, those are either or standing by a political side or are told what to say or only release information about the government that the government wants to be released. The point of investigative journalism is to go deeper into information that is not meant to be released. And that is why today it's more needed than ever, because the media has been controlled more than it has ever been. So this is where we need people who are good investigators that go deep into cases, sources, and extract as much information as they can so that we are actually aware of what is going on behind our backs so that we can prevent another scandal like NSA, newspapers, etc.
All right. Maximilian?
Oh yeah, just to go back to the Icelandic Prime Minister. So he, as well as others in the same case, well, he had to resign from power because he was linked to the Panama Papers. This also happened for the Madagascar president. I'm not sure how you say people from there. He had to resign as well because he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and fined $10.6 million due to charges of corruption that had been revealed by the Panama Papers in 2 years ago. Sorry. He and his son-in-law as well as daughter were also part of the plot, so they were all sentenced to prison. To conclude with investigative journalism, I'd say it's crucial nowadays because we need people denouncing all the unethical acts going throughout the world. They do that, and I think people, journalists, have a really important job of building a brighter future of corruption, political coercion, and providing environmental damages.
Thank you. Catherine?
Okay, so I think most has been said, but I think in my opinion, the role of investigative journalists obviously has a lot of mixed emotions by the public. Of course, it creates, looking at the Watergate scandal, a lot of cynicism and untrustworthiness in politicians. However, I think, especially citizens in a democratic society, they absolutely have the right to know, even to the finest detail, what their politicians are up to, and it creates that transparency in which they have a right to. So I think, yeah, just in general, it's crucial.
Thank you.
I believe that investigative journalism nowadays it has to be more, because media often manipulates the beliefs of the citizens. So in order to really know the truth about all of what is there, I think a good, well-done research has to come out of any big topic in order to really understand what is the deep meaning of any news. Because yeah, in many different countries the media is not really it's corrupted, so whatever the government wants to the citizens to know, they say through the media and manipulate their unconscious. So yeah, I think investigative journalism it's crucial for nowadays.
Thank you very much. And this has been our panel. We appreciate your questions. So we were delivered the question, is climate change caused by human activity? And will this climate change lead to a catastrophic world event? To introduce our argument, we must first prove to you that we are nothing if not reasonable. Pollution is not an issue to be taken lightly. It is indeed true that carbon gas emissions into our atmosphere make air less breathable. This has led to modern development of diseases such as asthma or urban lung cancer. It is true that dumping waste and chemicals into water sources worsens water quality and kills wildlife. Pollution is a horrible, unethical thing that individuals, corporations, and governments should combat together in order to better our quality of life. However, it is our group's adamant position that human pollution, such as gas emission, is not and has not been the cause of climate change on Earth. We intend to make our argument with reliable scientific data from credible institutions, historical data, and simple logic. Arguments which have been attempted to prove that climate change is a human-made problem in the past have been driven by emotional appeal and not by fact. These people will say that temperatures are rising and that this is caused by pollution, and cite no clear connection between the two. When asked for the connection, you will be told that you hate the planet, or be shown pictures of a starving polar bear. When their earlier predictions do not come true, they will say it is because they are right, and that nothing, not even nature itself, could prove them or their theories wrong. In the 2000s, when temperatures started to cool again, they switched their rhetoric from the former term, global warming, to climate change. Because our planet proved wrong their main theory that our planet was only going to get hotter and hotter until we all cooked. We will now present our findings, which prove that hot and cold periods cycling on our planet are perfectly natural, with scientific findings and historical precedent, the only real factors that should matter if this is at all a purely scientific debate and not political or emotional. Thank you.
Okay, so climate scientists will often claim that there's a huge catastrophe, and they also link it to the ozone layer, which protects us from ultraviolet sunlight. And they claim that once the ozone layer is going to be destroyed, we will probably all die. Well, they are wrong. NASA claimed that there's a 20% less ozone depletion in the last Arctic winter, and that proves to us that there's no threat of such a catastrophe, and that our planet is perfectly going to recover. And The Guardian wrote an article where they claim
that by 2060 our ozone layer is going to be fully recovered. So that's probably the first thing.
Okay.
Throughout the last century, scientists have done many predictions about how the world would change because of pollution and how it would affect us. However, many of those predictions have been proved to be wrong. Firstly, about 10 years ago, the brand name global warming was changed to climate change. The reason was simple. The Earth was failing to warm against all predictions made since the beginning of the scientific era. An additional benefit of the climate change slogan was that everything that goes wrong with the weather can be blamed on climate change caused by burning fossil fuel. For instance, in 2012, the Sandy hurricane that struck New York and New Jersey is routinely blamed on climate change by scientists. However, the Great New England hurricane of 1938 that struck the same area and was vastly worse cannot be blamed on climate change caused by CO2 because CO2 was not an issue at the time. So blaming on CO2 caused climate change is simply a made-up story without scientific foundation. Another failed prediction is the one from Peter Gunther, a professor at North Texas State University. It states that demographers agrees almost unanimously on the following grim timetable, that by 1975, widespread famines will begin in India. This will spread by 1990 to include all of India, Pakistan, China, and Near East Africa. Let's just take India, where the famine was supposed to start in 2013. India became the world's 7th largest exporter of agricultural products. China is prosperous and relatively well-fed, much better than under Mao. And most Latin American countries, which were supposed to be starving 15 years ago, are also a net exporter of grain, fruits, meat, and so on. A good deal of this is owed to the Green Revolution, which used new varieties of crops, fertilizer, pesticides, and improved agricultural practices to double or quadruple crop yields in precisely the place the doomsday prediction we're talking about, India, South Asia, and Latin America. That's a graph to show and prove the argument. And the last example I will talk about today is about mass extinction. At the first Earth Day, its political sponsors, Senator Gallo Nelson, said that Dr. S. Dillon Ripley, the secretary of Smithsonian Institute, that said that in 25 years, somewhere between 75 and 80% of all the species of living animals will be extinct. To put that in perspective, a 75 to 80% mass extinction is on the level of the cataclysm that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, caused by the environmental catastrophe of the 6 mile wide meteor crashing into the Earth and cloaking it an enormous cloud of ash and dust. Obviously, nothing remotely like that happened between 1970 and now. So there are many other failed predictions on climate change, but I don't have the time today to speak about all of them. But it's important to remember that global temperatures goes down, then up, and stay flat. That has been working out throughout history. Population growth taper off, while agricultural yields increase at an even higher rate. So we don't just sit around using up our current available resources. We make them better.
Thank you.
So many scientists have studied the natural reasons of climate change and why it isn't a threat as they say it is. So first theory, it's the Milankovitch theory that argues that changes of the Earth orbit appear every 100,000 years. So there's a change in what they call eccentricity. So meaning the shape of the Earth orbit changes and how much the orbit deviates from a perfect circle. So that makes an effect on the Earth orbit, and then every 40,000 years, there's a tilt in the Earth axis. Sorry. So both mean that there are different points of sun radiation, and so the temperatures differ. There are also volcanic eruptions, which can be a main natural cause of climate change. They release sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. Mixed with water, it creates what they call sulfurous aerosols. It is an additional layer of dust and ash to our atmosphere, which cools down areas affected, and that can vary with the wind. And these effects can last various years. And for example, some examples of that are the Indonesian eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991, which was a very big case of volcanic eruption. And the recent one, I guess you all remember when all the airlines, well, all the airplanes stopped flying, and it was pardon my Icelandic, the Eyjafjallajökull in 2010. So another point is the variation in solar radiation, and it's proven that every 11 years the flow of sun's radiation changes. So this is caused by the sun's sunspot, which vary depending on the magnetic fields. However, the sunspot emits stronger sun radiations, and with this change every 11 years, the Earth climate can change too, depending on the heat and on the force of those solar radiations. And a last point is the El Niño Southern Oscillations. And El Niño is a current flow in the Pacific that affects global weather. Every 3 to 10 years, the southeastern trade winds get weaker. So the warmer ocean current is to reach the east coast of South and North America. El Niño causes water off to America to be warmer and change the global weather patterns. When there is a warm water phase, many parts of the weather are changed, and for example, there are fewer hurricanes, fewer and less intense hurricanes in the Atlantic, because the air gets warmer and it changes of speed and direction, so hurricanes can form, not allowing hurricanes to form, and also bringing warmer weather to the rest of the world. And that's it for the natural causes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So hello, we are going to be the group that says that we believe that yes, climate change is anthropogenic in nature, and yes, it will be led a catastrophe if not kept in check. So, hello everyone, I'll be talking about plastic in the ocean. So, nowadays it is almost impossible to avoid plastic. We use plastic to transport our water, to contain our food, and to create the toys kids play with. Most of the plastic we use is only used once. We wish all this plastic was recycled, that it will be given a second life. However, it is not the case. The plastic that we have finished to use ends up in our oceans. Let me read you a couple of facts I found. According to the Ocean Conservancy, in just a few years, we might end up with a pound of plastic for every 3 pounds of fish in the sea. Earth Day proves in his paper that every minute there is one garbage truck of plastic that is dumped in our oceans, and that by 2050 there will be more plastic in the oceans than there are fish. Again, Ocean Conservancy explains that plastic has been found in more than 60% of all seabirds and 100% of sea turtle species that mistake plastic for food. Finally, Ocean Conservancy adds that plastic production and consumptions are predicted to double over the next 10 years. That means that if we don't do something now, we could be facing 250 million metric tons in the ocean in less than 10 years. So these figures cannot be denied. Humans are definitely playing a huge role in climate change. The plastic that we found in the ocean not only kills our species, but us too, as we end up eating them. There is no benefit in this. For the skeptical ones who believe climate change is not caused by human actions, well, there is no doubt that plastic was not created naturally. We are the cause plastic exists, and then the reason it ends up in our oceans. However, this could be avoided if we reduce our plastic consumption on land. We will prevent it from ending up in our ocean. Thank you.
So hi, I'm going to focus on the use of cars that humans do in our world. So I will start off by contradicting actually Mr. Raphael's point. And actually in 2010, a NASA study declared that automobiles were officially the largest net contributor of climate change pollution in the world. And they say that cars, buses, and trucks release pollutants and greenhouse gases that promote warming while emitting few aerosols that counteract it. The study actually says that. So what it means is that the increased heat that the cars are producing are being released, the heat is being released in the atmosphere, which causes warm environments and eventually causes climate change. So for instance, I have a couple examples, such as heating temperatures in the Arctic, which causes species to die, and it also causes sea levels to rise, which eventually leads to environmental disasters, also affects rainfall patterns, and tends to decrease temperature in tropics, and in mid and high latitude regions. So not only that, but car pollution also creates smog, which is a dangerous weather condition that actually reduces visibility, but it also poses a serious health threat. So cars can also not only create a climate change, but also can cause pollutions in other ways too, because cars actually use oil, and oil leaks from cars and gasoline spills at gas stations release toxins into the ground, which also are harming the environment and eventually causing climate change. So if we continue living this way, we will eventually destroy our planet, and we will have to take action even today in order to prevent it. Thank you.
So hello everyone. I would like to conclude with our final argument, which is on ocean acidification. So since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the acidity of surface ocean waters has been increasing by about 30%. And this increase is the result of humans emitting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and hence more being absorbed into the oceans. And the amount of carbon dioxide that is being absorbed by the upper layer of the oceans has been increasing by about 2 billion tons per year. And the problem is that carbon dioxide is nothing new, and its presence in big quantities is not a concern. However, the rate at which humans are emitting it in our atmosphere is a concern. And the two main causes for this influx of atmospheric carbon dioxide is fossil fuel emissions and deforestation, which in turn are caused by human activity. And as my colleague already said, fossil fuel emissions are the gases that are coming out of our cars, of airplanes, of factories, that are burning fossil fuels such as oil or gases. And this exponential increase in fossil fuel consumption has created ocean acidification, among many other climate change related issues. And second of all, burning down forests is like burning fossil fuels, and for the most part, human activities such as logging is to blame for deforestation. It not only emits a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but it also destroys one of the very things that helps absorb it. And the silver lining here is that ocean acidification is just one more symptom humans are already aware of. And most people know that deforestation and burning fossil fuels are bad for the environment. Most people know that they should drive less and consume less energy, but unfortunately they do not put enough effort to see the situation improve. And ocean acidification brings this entire problem into the ocean and to a world many people are not familiar with, thus potentially leading to a catastrophe if increased awareness and specific actions to tackle the problem aren't undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. As you know, there won't be any questions because you're supposed to give me your answer to this particular issue on the final exam. That's part of the essay question I'm going to ask. All right, just to talk a little bit about that. On the day of the final exam, regarding the question specifically on climate change, of course you can take any of the arguments that have been presented in class today, but you're also welcome to continue doing your own research and try and come up with some kind of quote-unquote definitive answer. If after all the research you've done you still feel that it's still an open question, that's still fine, because I mean it's meaning that you're in the process of trying to find out more about it. But don't hesitate to try and continue finding arguments either one way or the other, and proving in your personal reflection that you're sort of being objective about it, okay, from start to finish. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for your